One of the things about the Pangnirtuuq program, which was quite exciting, was that we were bringing up, we were training, we were developing young scholars in the field, and I'm relatively proud of a number of people who came through the program who now have gone on and established careers. I'm not going to talk about all of them or many of them. Um, uh, just first of all, as an example, was Kiwi Martin. Kiwi was working on her doctorate at the University of Toronto on Inuit literature, and she realized that if she was going to do anything on Inuit literature, one, she should learn some Inuktitut, and two, she should actually meet some real live Inuit. So she signed up on our program. She actually worked with us for a number of years on the program, and she has gone on and I think made some really important and valuable and insightful contributions to the study of Inuit literature. I think it's incredibly important work. The other person who I just wanted to mention, and he comes quite critical in the story, is a fellow called Ian Morrow. Ian came to us, actually he was with us in 2001. At that time he was an undergraduate student in environmental science. He went on. Now he didn't do his doctorate on the north. He did his doctorate actually on canola and the issues around genetically modified canola. But he continued to work with us in the north. For years he came and taught on the program. He taught the more environmental side of the program and the environmental issues. So he kind of grew up with us, if I can put it that way. He worked with me as sort of my sidekick for a number of years. He's quite a character, and he would enjoy me saying that as well. But just one little thing that it relates to this, which partly came out from Ian's teaching, is we used to have the students do a plant project. And the idea was that they would have to go out on the tundra and collect plants, various plants on the tundra, and then they would have to identify them scientifically. They'd have to look them up in the various books, identify them, and I don't know, whatever other scientific information there was. And then we would set up a workshop where they would have to talk to the elders about what the names of these plants were, what the uses of these plants were, and that kind of thing. Not a complicated project, but an interesting one, right? Just one of those little things which just shows you how dumb we can be sometime. The first couple of years Ian and Peter and I ran this, I think we asked Jaco and Joanna C. to be our elders to talk to us about this. I can't blame them entirely, but it may have been them. Anyway, so the students would show them these plants, and they'd go, Nunarak plant, Nunarak plant. Which really, okay, this is useless. But also, I mean, it reflected on the fact that I have to confess I knew nothing about the various plants or the names of them. That's not something I'd ever asked. And then one year, and I don't know whether it was Ian, I think it was Ian had the bright idea, why don't we ask a couple of the women to come in and do this? So we came in and we asked a couple of women to come in and do this. Well, the level, depth, complexity of plant knowledge was, and I was interpreting, was absolutely overwhelming. I remember one student had laid out their plants, and one of the women went through and named these 4 plants, and the student said to me, "But Chris, that's all the same plant. Biologically or in botany, that's all the same plant. Why is she naming them all 4 differently?" I said, "Well, I don't know. How am I supposed to know?" So I asked, and she said, "Well, they're 4 different phases. The plant occurs in 4 different phases over the course of the summer, and they each have different names." Well, I had no idea about this kind of thing. And then, of course, when you get them into talking about what the plants were used for, the sort of various properties of the plants and what they were used for. I mean, it was an amazing project. We learned our lesson. Knowledge is gendered. Knowledge is highly gendered. You got to ask the right people about the right things. If you ask the guys, it's plant. If you ask the women, the depth of knowledge was, and I mean, a couple of times Joannes, he sat in on these sessions, and he was genuinely learning along with the students about the details of this knowledge. I mean, we should know those kind of things, right? But when you're working with when you're working with people, you sometimes just assume that any elder will know whatever. That's not true. And so you often have to be much more careful about who you ask for what information. It was a phenomenal experience. And that whole, the way we ran the program, the way we thought about things, taught Ian in particular profound lessons about how to work with communities and engaging communities in their kind of projects and the kinds of things that they wanted to work on. In the course of things, and one of the things that Ian was always really interested in was he's not interested in publishing articles and writing books like he's supposed to. He's a modern young scholar. He's interested in making movies, making films that can express complex ideas to people so that they can grasp them. And so he did a movie as part of his doctoral work. That was extremely controversial, but since that's not to do with the North, I won't go down that road. But and so he was really interested in doing some movie work in the North, and a number of years ago, I can't remember which group it was, but anyways, some research group put out a call for Indigenous filmmakers to make movies on climate change and the environment. And Zach Kunu, the very famous Inuit film director, Zach had put in an application to make a movie on climate change. And his application was rejected. So for various reasons, Zach happened to be visiting Peter and Ian and I in Winnipeg. And we were out for a beer one night. And Zach said to us, will you guys support me in an appealing this thing? I mean, like, I'm an Inuit filmmaker, and they don't want me to make a movie. They're not going to pay me to make a movie on climate change. So on the first round of beer, we said, sure, we'll support you. We'll write letters of support and do that kind of thing. Well, by the time we got to the third round of beer, we said that to hell with all of that, we're going to get the money ourselves, each one of us who has access to different pots of money. We're going to apply for the money ourselves, and we're going to pool the money together, and we're going to make a film on climate change. Zach, you're going to make the film on climate change. We're going to do it before these other guys do it, and we're going to do it better than these other guys do it. So let's do it. And we did it. We all four of us got pretty big grants, actually. We got big grant money. We pooled all the money. And so Ian was working with Zach on this project. I was more the sort of manager of the project, the overall manager of it, and kept keeping an eye on the money and, what we were doing and where we were going. But Zach and Ian did most of the legwork. And they went they were supposed to go to 5 communities, but we ran out of money. So they went to Pangnirtuuq, because that's where Ian had worked. They went to Resolute Bay, and they went to Igloolik, and they also did some filming in Iqaluit as well. They interviewed Zach interviewed elders on camera. The photographer that they used, the cameraman that they used, was a guy called David Poisey from Pangnirtuuq, who had worked with John Huston on his films. And David's a brilliant cinematographer. He does wonderful films. With Zach directing, Ian coordinating, and they interviewed, I think, 60 Inuit elders in that process. They were supposed to go down to Arviat and do a section in Arviat and interview elders in Arviat as well, but we ran out of money. So Zach said, "Well, who cares about we've got enough as it is, right?" And So they did all of these amazing interviews with the elders talking to Zach, and so they had an enormous pile of material to try and sort through, and Zach then of course became the problem: how do we shape a movie out of this? We got all this material. Well, how do you shape this into a film? And initially, Zach's idea was actually Johannes E. Klapik, who we've been talking about. Johannes E. had given them one of the most coherent, sophisticated, articulate lectures on climate change that any of them had ever heard. And Zach basically wanted to use Johannes E.'s interview as a kind of overarching narrative for the whole film, and then sort of put in other people around it. In the end, he decided not to go that way, that rather what we would do is work through a series of themes that came up and sort of put together the pieces from each of the elders with themes. A couple of things happened. They did. Ian went up and lived in Igloolik that winter with Zach, and they did the sort of first run through the first cut up in Igloolik, and they did it with a couple of Inuit advisors, Inuit elders advising them and helping them, and that's actually where the title came from. One of the things that was fairly consistently stated by elders from
What's the title?
Well, I'm going to come to that. One of the things that consistently came from the elders from Iqaluit to Igloolik, that's a huge distance. All of them said the earth has shifted. The Earth's axis has shifted. And so that when I was a child, the sun used to rise there and set there. Now the sun rises there and it sets there. And actually they measured the angle in Igloolik from one of the elders telling them. The Earth's axis has shifted. Well, so part of Ian's job was sort of, okay, well, what's this all about? So he phoned up NASA. NASA basically told him that, if you guys are going to publish stuff like that, that'll destroy all of traditional knowledge, because that is pure and utter nonsense. That has never happened. That is crap. Don't put that in your film because it's simply not true. So Ian phoned me up and he says, Chris, what do I do? We've got all of these elders, 60 elders telling us this, right? What do I do? I said, well, the elders telling you that constitutes empirical data. Every elder has told you that where they see the sun rising and setting has shifted. So I said, you go back to NASA and say, why? Why would they observe this? This is the observation, and it's verified 60 times over. Why would they observe this? Well, the explanation was actually far worse than I don't know about it's worse than the Earth's axis tilting. The explanation from NASA was, well, because the chemical composition of the atmosphere has changed. And so the angle of refraction of the sun through the atmosphere has changed because of the different chemicals that are in the atmosphere. That's why you're not actually seeing the sun rising and setting at different places. It looks like it's rising and setting at different places because it's refracting through the atmosphere at a different angle. Okay, how do you explain that to an Inuit elder? Okay, we explained it to Zach, and Zach's sitting down trying to explain it to the elder. Well, how do you explain it? How do you say angle of refraction? And he looked into it right. So Zach is trying to explain it to the elder, and this guy looks at Zach and says, "Oh, you mean Kaparangayuk?" Zach's an Inuk, right? Zach had never heard Kaparangayuk. He said, "What's Kaparangayuk?" He said, "Well, when you're fishing, and when you're fishing with a leister, a fish spear," he said, "you see the fish in the water, but the fish is not actually where you see it because of the water. And so when you go to strike the fish through the water, you have to actually adjust the angle of your strike in order to actually hit the fish, because it's not where you see it. In other words, because of the angle of refraction through the water." And Zach just sort of looked at this elder and said, "Yes, Kaparangayuk." Now, so that becomes the title of the movie, Kaparangayuk, which is really, I guess, angle of refraction. is what it technically is. So Zach and Ian did the first cut and the first outline of Pangnirtuuq. The first cut was 3 hours long. It was fabulous material, but way too long for that kind of movie, right? And so then we had to get into trimming it down and trimming it down and trimming it down, and that's more where I came into it. And as they trimmed it down, where my major role was, they had got somebody in Inuit to do the translations for the subtitles. But as they trimmed it and cut it, the lineup with the subtitles and the lineup between the Inuktitut and the subtitles and the translations was no longer working right. So my job was to actually work with Ian when we were doing the fine cuts to say, okay, cut here, together at the beginning and the end of a sentence in Inuktitut, right, rather than have it halfway through a sentence, because Ian didn't speak Inuktitut, and then to smooth over the translation so that what we actually put in was there. So so we were getting down to the final cuts. Some really interesting debates. There is actually one white guy speaking English in the movie. It talks about the what did he say? The flood in Pangnirtuuq being of biblical catastrophic proportions. Okay, that's Ron Morneau, who was the administrative officer in Pangnirtuuq at the time. Ian and I wanted to cut the one white guy out because it looked to us, it seemed kind of weird having one white guy speaking in Inuktitut when the whole rest of the movie was Inuit elders speaking or one white guy speaking English when the rest of the movie was Inuit elders speaking Inuktitut. But Zach insisted that it stay. He felt that Ron had said it best. And in some ways that was true, he had. So Zach insisted that it stay. The film was actually really interesting. It was incredibly controversial. Zach and Ian traveled all over the place. They've shown it all over the world, showing the film. And in that film, the Inuit say a lot about climate change that is hotly disputed in the scientific community. The section in there on polar bears, back to polar bears again, the section in there on polar bears is absolutely amazing. And basically the Inuit are saying that the problem with polar bears is not the climate, but the polar bear scientists. That the scientists have disrupted and disturbed the polar bears so much, and they are starving by putting the tracking collars on the polar bears. It's starving the polar bears to death. That's the polar bear scientists are the problem. Or of course, Zach and Ian have the gall to go and show this to the polar. There is apparently a convention of polar bear scientists. I didn't know that, but apparently there's. They went and showed this film to the polar bear scientists, and you can imagine the kind of explosion that caused with them. NASA was still really upset with the stuff over, because in the film the stuff about the Earth's axis shifting is still in there, right? NASA was totally upset with that. They were so upset that the film actually made the national news. Peter Mansbridge picked up on it, and it made the national news because of their complaint. It was a highly controversial film, but I think what it did is it really provided a very clear statement of the Inuit understanding of how their world was changing. And it's not an easy film to follow because it's in the style that Zach uses, which is there's no overarching meta-narrative. It's simply the statements of all of these Inuit elders put together. But I think if you look at it carefully and follow there are various sequences in it, and follow those sequences, then on the issue of changes in weather, changes in seal patterns, changes in polar bear patterns, movement of the sun and the moon, changes in the land, all of those pieces. There's a sequence on each of those, and you get a very sharp picture of what the issues are that are at stake. So I think it's an important piece. and working on it together with Zach and Ian, it really came out of the kind of engagement that they were able to get with the community and with the people at the local level, the hunters talking about their own experience. So I think we did accomplish what we were after, which was to get a way better film out before any of the other guys did, and actually a very powerful film. I think Zach and Ian were showing it in Berlin at some film festival this year, so it's still having a fair bit of impact. And the other advantage, if you speak Inuktitut, is that all of the raw footage of all the interviews are online. But unless you speak Inuktitut, that doesn't do you any good. So it was a really important and exciting piece of work, and it was very exciting to be involved in it. My direct role in the research was limited, but in the framing of the whole thing and sort of in a lot of the translation pieces, I had an awful lot to say of that. So that was really the last major thing that I've worked on, and that kind of brings us up to date, I think. So thank you for this opportunity to bend your ears. So.